As Carlos said, this thesis is titled Essays on Gender and Immigration in the EU Labour Market. And before starting with the presentation, I would very shortly like to mention the evolution of these last 4 years, which have flown. So first, I would like to thank all the people that hosted me, first in Amsterdam, then in Florence, and finally in Malaga. Also, I'd like to mention that the work that I've done in this year has led to a publication first at the International Labour Review, and it's the first chapter that I'm going to be presenting today. And the second publication, which is a work that is not part of this thesis, but which will be coming in the Research Economic Inequality. And finally, I was lately awarded with the Alexandre Pedros Award for the work that I'm going to be presenting in the third chapter. So as a very, very brief introduction, this is the main outcomes, and thanks to all who have helped me through these years. So the outline is going to be as follows. I'm going to be presenting each chapter separately, and then I'm going to sum up all the contributions in a final section. So the first chapter is titled Occupational Segregation by Gender and Immigration Status in the European Union, Accounting for Cross-Country Differences. So the main motivation for this work was first that we know that migration flows have been increasing a lot in the EU area. Actually, these are the number of international, both in stock and in shares, the number of international immigrants that came to the EU27 or Schengen area. And we can see this upward trend. And also, if we look at the more recent trends, we can see that it has slowed, but still it's upward. And we can also detect over here the refugee crisis. So in this context of increasing migration, the literature has, of course, studied how are immigrants integrated into the labor market. We know that they suffer a lot of inequalities and disadvantages, not only in terms of wages, but also overqualification, prestige, status, and so on and so forth. And work that's more related to our topic, which is about occupational segregation, there has been confirmation that there is segregation by country of origin in Europe, but it's true that most of these studies are either country case studies or they do not take its interaction with gender into account. So in this context, what we are going to do in this chapter is we're going to offer a comparative perspective, so that we are going to take into account different countries, and we are going to follow an intersectional approach. This means we're not only going to focus on migration, but both migration and gender, so that we can unveil some factors that remain hidden. So following that, we're going to measure the level of segregation that male and female immigrants experience in the EU, also native male and women, but the focus today is going to be on immigrants. Then we are also going to distinguish first and second generation immigrants to see whether there's been certain assimilation. And finally, since I already let you know that we're going to find differences across countries, we're going to perform a country factor analysis to see whether immigrants' characteristics explain some of these geographical disparities. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use, in order to measure occupational segregation experienced by a particular group, the local segregation indexes that here Olga and Coral developed. It's true that there are other measures, but the benefits of these ones is that we are able to quantify what segregation that each group experiences. Most of the other measures either give an overall picture, so they just tell us, like in a country or in a region, what's the segregation that's experienced, or they require complicated pairwise comparisons. So what these indexes basically do is they compare the distribution across occupations of a group that we want to study with the occupational structure of the economy. And in this way, we can measure occupational segregation. So formally it looks like this, and basically what we are doing is we're going to look occupation by occupation from all the individuals from group G. So let's say female immigrants. How many are working in occupation J, and on the other hand, we're going to have from all the workers, how many are working in occupation J. So we're going to compare this is the occupational distribution of a group with the economic structure. Here I'm just picturing two indexes. We have more and we use others for robustness. And also like to mention that today I'm going to be presenting the results of this index because it has a very nice interpretation. Basically what this index is going to tell us is the percentage of the group that we are studying that we need to change occupations so as not to be occupationally segregated. Okay? As I was mentioning also, we're going to take, or we're going to perform a counterfactual analysis to see if differences across countries are due to the characteristics of immigrants, and how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to take a reference country. In our case, it's going to be the UK because it has the most educated immigrants. Also, it has a big number of EU28 immigrants who have, in terms of paperwork, facilities, and it's an old and long, it has a long history of migration. And we're going to take the characteristics that immigrants have in the UK, and we're going to extrapolate them to the remaining countries, so that we are going to homogenize those characteristics. In our case, these are the variables that we have available in our data. It's going to be education, years of residence, and origin, which means if they come from EU28 or outside EU28. How are we going to do this? Well, it's a propensity score method, but I don't going to get technical. Just we work by reweighting and changing the weight of the observation. So formally it looks like this, but if someone wants to, we can discuss it later. What this is going to allow us is, once we have homogenized the characteristics of immigrants across all countries, we're going to again measure segregation, and in that way we're going to be able to estimate the compositional effect. This is the difference between how segregation is in a country of, let's say, female immigrants, and how segregation could look like if they had the characteristics that female immigrants have in the UK. And not only that, then we can decompose this compositional effect using a Shapley decomposition and see what's the contribution that its covariate makes. Okay? So moving into the data, our main data source is the 2005-19 European Labour Survey. Today all the results are coming from the year 2019, but in the paper we also explore the evolution. So we're going to retrieve all those employed workers who are aged 16 to 74. As I was mentioning, we're going to have 4 groups: male female natives, male female immigrants. In terms of occupations, we're going to consider 130. This is the most disaggregated level that we have in our data set. And the final sample is going to be 20 countries, because immigrants are too small in some countries, so we have a small unit bias problems. And then in order to study the situation of the first and the second generation immigrants, we need to go into the 2014 ad hoc model, because in this model we're going to have information about the parents, whether they were born in the country or they came from abroad. So we're going to define second generation immigrants as those individuals that were born in a country, so let's say Spain, but either 1 or 2 parents came from another country. And since this model is not available for all countries, we have a final sample of 15. Having said that, I'm now moving into the results section. So what you can see here, it's the DA index that I was mentioning before for both male and female immigrants. There's a lot of information here, so I will just go into the main points. What we can see is that there are large differences. Starting with female immigrants, what we see is that the highest levels are found in Italy and in Greece, with levels around 49%. So what this means is that 1 out of 2 female immigrants in these countries could have to swap occupations so as not to be segregated. However, the smallest numbers are found in the UK with 0.25 and Netherlands. So in these countries, it could be 1 out of 2. So there is a big difference. For males, what we see is again the highest levels are around 15% in Greece and the smallest one in the UK. And despite these differences, what it's especially noteworthy is that female immigrants are more segregated than male immigrants in most countries. So it is important to take also gender into account, because we see that there seems to be a double disadvantage. It's not only migration status, but it's also gender. Moreover, this fact is also intensified or repeated when we take other indexes into account or confirm. Just to make it easier for you to get a picture of how it looks like, I'm presenting this for female immigrants only. For males, it's quite similar. So what we can see is that segregation seems to be higher in the southeast a little bit. The north, surprisingly, has not a common pattern, but overall what we see is that northwest has lower segregation levels. And something that we find quite interesting in the case of female immigrants is that we know, okay, so I jumped here, here. So what we see is that female immigrants are concentrated in caring activities in all countries, but the difference is in who is employing them. So what we see is that in northern countries like Denmark or Finland, Norway or Sweden, it's the institutionalized sector. So it's more like maybe people, let's say, retirement for old people institutions or nursery and so on. Whereas in the southern countries like here, Cyprus, Greece, it must be here, Italy and Spain here, it's the households who are employing these women. So it's true that they are all concentrated in these activities, but still there are important differences. And this might be interesting in terms of labor market conditions. If we focus on second generation immigrants, again, I know that it's a bit messy to see. Just what you have to look at, it's the light blue color, which is the second generation, and compare it with the dark color, so it's the first generation. And what we can see is that the levels of segregation are smaller for the second generation than the first one. So this is signaling an assimilation theory or evidence. Nevertheless, the second generation is still more segregated than the natives. Natives, I mean, those whose parents were born in the country. So there's something on going there. Okay, and finally, going into the results that we obtain when we do this counterfactual analysis, that is, when we have homogenized the characteristics. Here you see conditional segregation. This is how segregation could look like now that they have immigrants in all countries have the same characteristics. Okay, and nearby the compositional effect. So this is measuring how has it changed. And overall, what we can see is that segregation could be reduced. Nevertheless, the effect is not so big. So this is signaling that there are many other factors. It's not the characteristics only. It's also institutions, integration policy, norms, discrimination going on. So that's what we get from here. Moving into the main conclusions. As I was mentioning, it's quite important to follow this intersectional approach. We've shown evidence of this double disadvantage because immigrants present higher segregation levels than natives, although I haven't shown anything about the natives today. But inside the immigrant population, it's female immigrants who are more segregated. Also, we could broadly mention or classify cross-country difference as west-north, southeast. Take it a little bit with caution because there are exceptions. There seems to be assimilation. And regarding the counterfactual analysis, it's true that immigrants' characteristics seem to play a role, but it's still not so big. So what we are trying to suggest is that there are other latent variables that are also affecting the situation of immigrants. So now I jump into the second chapter, which is titled Winners and Losers from Occupational Segregation in Europe, the Role of Gender and Migration Status. So it's a continuation of this first work. And the main motivation is that, okay, we've quantified the level of segregation that these immigrants and natives experience, but we know that segregation alone does not tell if it's beneficial or detrimental. Why? Because it is going to depend on the quality of the occupations where you work. So let's say that we have male natives who work in engineering occupations, in top administrative occupations, and they are over-concentrated there. Since these occupations have higher prestige, higher salary, then this over-concentration and segregation might be benefiting them. So we need to take this into account, and that's what we are going to do in this second chapter. Again, following this comparison and intersectional approach, we analyze the economic, both and economic well-being consequences that job segregation has for each of the four groups that we are exploring in our thesis. So how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to use new indexes, which are called well-being loss gain indexes, again, proposed by Olga and Coral. And now what these indexes are going to do is they're going to take the quality of the occupations into account. In this case, it's going to be proxied by wages, average wage of the occupation. And then by including this information and relying on social welfare functions, we're going to measure well-being gain loss of a group as the gap that exists between the well-being that the group derives from its actual occupational distribution and the one it could have without segregation. So it looks like this, and as you can notice, the first part is super similar to the segregation indexes that I was showing before, What is now included, as you can see, it's the information on the quality of the occupations, right? Moreover, it also has this epsilon parameter, so that we can include aversion to inequality in our study. And just to mention that when epsilon actually equals 0, what we get is the monetary loss gain of the group, which is expressed as a proportion of the average weight of the economy. But overall, the main idea from this slide is that occupational segregation will translate into a well-being gain when the group is over-concentrated in high-wage occupations, measured by this ratio here, and vice versa. So that's the main idea, okay?
So well-being is measured through
wages, yeah. We're assuming that it's through income that it's mainly coming. We are aware that there are other factors in the job that should be included, but this is a way of doing so. However, this first analysis is going to tell us what's the well-being gain that each group derives. But what happens if we want to get an overall picture? What's happening at the country level, for instance? Then we need to aggregate it. But in order to do so, we need to follow certain normative properties. And in order to do so, again, we use other tools that Coral and Olga developed, which is called social welfare loss. So this is what a whole country, area, region, whatever we are analyzing, that it's experiencing, in our case, countries. And what we're going to use is what they called social welfare loss curve associated with segregation. So this is going to be a curve for each country, okay? And what this curve is going to be telling us is the following things. I'm going to get a lot of information very intuitively and graphically. First, we're going to be able, by looking the point in which the curve becomes horizontal here.
Sorry.
See.
What are you aggregating there?
It's only the losses. So we are going to assign a value of 0 to those groups who have well-being gains. And then we're going to take the losses after assigning this value of 0 to the ones who have gain. And
so you are aggregating the losses of all the groups.
That's it, yeah. So from there, after aggregating that, what we're going to get first by looking at here is how many the set of workers in this country that are experiencing losses. Then, by looking also at this horizontal point, but in the vertical axis, what is the per capita cumulative welfare loss, so the extent of it. And then the curvature, it's going to let us know what's the inequality in the losses experienced by the disadvantaged group. So graphically, we can get a lot of information. Moreover, it has a very advantageous properties that it also has a dominance criterion. So let's say that this is the curve for, let's say, France, and then we have one here for the UK. Since these curves are not crossing and the one of UK is below, then we know that social welfare losses are going to be smaller in the UK than in France, okay? Of course, curves may cross, and in that case, we would use indexes. We do use indexes also in the paper, not so in this today due to time. So again, we are also going to use the same counterfactual analysis as before to see if in this case characteristics are also explaining something. I forgot to say it, but also in the first chapter we use all the countries for robustness in the counterfactual analysis. And moving into the data, European Labor Force Survey, the main data source, but this data does not have information on earnings, which is what we use to proxy quality. So we need to go into the structure of earnings survey. Since this database has really small limitations, we try to overcome them by using the 2015 USILC. It's just, let's say, like a small improvement, but we wanted to make sure that it was corrected, not getting into the details. And in this case, we're going to consider 12 European countries so that we can still get a broad image of what's going on. So I'm going to start talking about the monetary losses and gains that male and female immigrants experience. So this is when epsilon equals 0. What we can see is that that bars are below 0. So this means that both groups are experiencing monetary losses due to their segregation. It's only actually in Portugal where they have significant gains, male immigrants. And what does this mean? So if we go into the most extreme case, this is the Italian case. This means that, for instance, immigrant women could lose on average 21% of the economy's average weight due to their occupational segregation. So it's big numbers. And once again, we see that the losses are bigger for female immigrants than for males. So it's not that they are more segregated, but also since they are more concentrated in low-paying occupations, they do have higher losses. What happens when we increase epsilon, so that we move from monetary to well-being consequences? What we basically see is that all losses become bigger and bigger. That's because we are increasing also our aversion to inequality. Okay, so the main idea is that the whole idea becomes just that losses are bigger. Geographical pattern, just to picture it again, we have to say that the exceptions here are Portugal and Germany, but overall it's the south and Germany versus the northwest and Portugal. I would like to mention that actually Spain, Italy, Slovenia, Germany are the countries where immigrants are less educated. So this might, of course, explain why they are concentrated in low-paying occupations, and this is probably leading the higher welfare losses. And the CC, which is
Yeah, could you explain?
it's on.
Could you explain again the intuition behind the loss? Is the loss of welfare or wage due to segregation with respect to
With respect to the welfare you would have if there was no segregation. So if your occupational distribution was the same as the one that
the native,
as the whole one, the one of the economy, including natives and immigrants.
Okay.
As the whole one.
Okay.
That's it. It's the gap between those two situations. Okay? So, what social welfare losses could look like? I know that there are a lot of parts, so just two main take-home ideas from here. So from the dominance, what do we get? The most extreme cases. What we get is that this curve here is Portugal. So we know that once we aggregate the losses of all groups, this social loss, it's smallest in Portugal, and the highest here in Italy. The one crossing it's Germany, but overall what we see is that two extreme countries emerge. And then another take-home idea, it's that from the incidence, this is the point in which the curves become flat, which are in most cases around this 40%. What we get is, in most countries, it's 40-45% of the population who's experiencing social welfare losses. And why is this? Because native women are also experiencing welfare losses from their occupational distribution. I haven't talked about natives, but just for you to know that female natives also experience, and we can see it by these huge incidence levels. And just to finish with this chapter, how could welfare loss gain look like if immigrants would have the same characteristics as those in the UK? Just in case you don't remember, we were departing from this graph. So you can see negative bars with really huge and high levels. And now we would move into this situation. So what we overall see, it's an improvement. Especially male immigrants would derive certain gains in some cases. Females couldn't do so, but the loss could be reduced. Okay? And there are two main interesting cases that come from here. First is that we see that the situation of Portugal would even improve. So it's not the characteristics of the immigrants in Portugal what is behind their better relative results. It seems that there are policies in place. And we have actually read in this, I was reading a lot and documenting what's going on in Portugal, and we do see that the government has been trying to attract high-skilled people, signing bilateral agreements. Also in terms of integration policies, it's at the European level at the top. So there is this external organization that measures how integration policies are doing, and Portugal is doing quite good. And it seems that it's been in the end translated. And what we also get is that the UK is better because mainly immigrants are super high skilled. So it seems to play a role. Nevertheless, this is only characteristic, only part of the story. As I was mentioning before, there are more factors at play. So to sum up, what we see is that from the occupationalization levels that we previously quantified, we see that the consequences, both in terms of monetary and well-being, are negative for most foreign workers, again, especially for female immigrants. We haven't discussed it a lot, but native women are also experiencing welfare losses, and this goes in line with this wage gap that we detect, where female immigrants or female natives are also concentrated in sometimes less paying occupations. From the geographical differences, we could mention two extreme cases, Portugal and Italy, and this counterfactual analysis was signaling that education, because from simply the composition we see, that education it's playing somehow a role. So what we can learn from here is that a government should, especially in terms of migration, try to avoid educational downgrading and especially facilitating title and document recognition and homologation, because this is going to allow supply and skill much to be more adjusted. So that's the direction of a little bit the results. And now I'm going into the last chapter, which is titled Immigration, Childcare and Gender Differences in the Spanish Labor Market. So the focus in this chapter is going to be different. What I mean is that in the first two chapters, we focus on the situation of the immigrant population. Now we kind of look at it in another way, and it's what's the effect that immigrants can have on the host labor market. Okay, so we are flipping the coin. It's related, but it's another focus. So the motivation for this paper, again, first, came because we know that there's been a huge wave of immigration in Spain. Just for you to know, from the end of the 1990s, it was from 3%, and in 10 years, in 2018, it became like 13%, so it was huge. I've plotted also the evolution for other big economic EU motors. So this was something that was not happening in all countries. Italy also had this boom, but this is something that we knew. Also, we know that female immigrants work in the household sector. I've previously mentioned it, but if we want to look at how it's been the evolution, here we see the total household employees, and what we see is that this increase is mainly due to the number of immigrants that are entering this sector. So it increased enormously. Okay. Also, we know that there are relevant gender gaps in the labor market in Spain and in many other developed countries. And just as an interesting number, if we go into the 2019 labor force survey and we look at why individuals are inactive, we see that in the case of women, 35% say that it's because of family responsibilities, whereas it's only 4% in the case of men. So with this context in mind, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to exploit this weight of immigration and the over-concentration in the household sector and see whether they can somehow alleviate gender gaps by substituting native women on child-caring activities. Okay? So that's the main idea of this work. What do we know from previous work? I'm just focusing in Spain due to time. So what we know from our work that Lydia Farré and her colleagues did, that immigration in the same period from 1988 to 2008 increased the availability and affordability of household services, and that through this channel, the labor supply of a skilled woman with family responsibilities increased with respect to those without those responsibilities. Family responsibilities were either having a child or an elderly person living at home. However, what we can say that could be improved is that they only take two labor outcomes: the decision to work, not to work, and the number of hours work. So we believe that there is more space to explore. Also, they're using cross-sectional data, so they cannot control for individual heterogeneity. And also, they're looking at the comparing women with children with children with family responsibilities with those who do not have. But we know that child penalties are not only with respect to childless mothers, but it's also with respect to fathers. So this is the line that we're going to follow. So it's linked, but we try to go a little bit deeper into it. So what are we going to do in this chapter? Well, first we want to ask and see whether immigration can affect gender differences in the labor market through this childcare substitution effect. We want to look both at the extensive and intensive margins of the labor market. So it's not only if you work more, yes, no, but what about hours, days, part-time, full-time employment, so on. And something that has not received too much attention in this literature, what happens with earnings? Does it translate into a higher, that's its salary or not? So how we are gonna do this? It's going to be a double difference strategy. So let me try to simplify it. This is the equation and the regression that we're gonna be running. So first of all, it's a panel data where we have, and we're going to be looking at individual I that lives in a region R. We're in Spain, so 52 provinces, and in a given year T, which goes from 1998 to 2008. I'm going to start just first mentioning which are the outcomes, labor market outcomes that we consider, and then I'm going into the strategy. Okay, so just for you to know, we're going to consider a binary variable, that's you work, not do not work. In terms of extensive measures, days annually work, weekly hours work, and again, if it's full-time, part-time. And finally, for earnings, real annual earnings and real daily earnings, these last ones are part-time adjusted, so they are close to hourly wages. Okay, and here comes a little bit the tricky part. So in the other part of the equation, what we have is first, a child dummy, so this is going to take value 1 when the individual, woman, man, becomes a father or a mother. We also have a dummy variable for female, we take value 1 if it's a woman. And then we're going to have here the regional share of immigrants. So the share of immigrants that's in each region, in each moment of time. Okay, this changes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to interact these variables. But before going into the interaction, where the tricky part comes, just to mention that we are also including individual time varying controls like age, experience, number of children, the age of the eldest child, and so on, and also individual fixed effects, regional fixed effects, and year fixed effects. Okay, so as I was mentioning, the double difference strategy, it's relying on these interactions here. Why? Because these interactions are going to let us see what's the differential impact that immigrants have on individuals, men, women, and those with children and those who do not have children. And we're going to focus on this woman to men differential. What I mean is, if we run this regression and then we estimate the parameters, we can see what's the effect that immigrants have for each of these individuals. So in the case of men without kids, it's going to be captured by alpha 1. Those with women without kids, alpha 1 plus alpha 2. So the woman to men differential effect, it's coming from alpha 2 for those individuals who do not have kids. In the case of the individuals who have kids, we're going to have alpha 2 plus alpha 4. So if we do this double difference, this is between the gender-based differences, we compare those who have kids and do not have kids, then we can say that alpha 4, this is the additional effect, this alpha 4, it's capturing the additional effect of immigrants on families with children, and this is mainly coming through the role as a childcare substitute. So this alpha 4 is going to be telling us what's the role that immigrants play as childcare substitutes, right? Of course, we may have endogeneity problems, mainly coming from the location choices of immigrants. They tend to locate, of course, in places where there are more labor market opportunities. So how are we going to deal with this? Well, first of all, as I was mentioning, we are controlling for selection on unobservable characteristics with the fixed effects, but in terms of the endogeneity that might come from migration location patterns, we're going to use a well-known instrumental variable. So we're going to instrument all the variables we have this variable, the regional share of immigrants. So this instrument, it's basically doing the following. We're going to predict the distribution of immigrants based on the distribution of past waves of immigrants. So the idea here is we're going to exploit the network system that works between generation of immigrants. Okay, so it's well known that immigrants tend to disproportionately locate in places where people from similar regions was already settled to exploit information, labor market options, even housing at the beginning. So this is how this works. So formally, the instrument looks like this. And what we do is, let's say, we're gonna predict how many immigrants are in Madrid in year 2008. So how are we gonna do this? For each country of origin, we're gonna operate as follows. So each source of origin of immigrants. We're gonna take a base year, in our case 1991, and we're gonna look, let's say Brazilians. From all the Brazilians that were in Spain in 1991, how many were there in Madrid? Okay? And then what we're gonna do is, okay, and how many Brazilians are in year 2008 in Spain? So we're gonna distribute from all those Brazilians that are in Spain in 2008, we're gonna predict which ones are in Madrid based on how many were in Madrid in the year 1991. We're gonna do this for every country of origin, for every region. So it's that we are distributing immigrants based on how they were settled. Okay? Of course, this is a stock, so we need to have a percentage, we need to normalize it. We normalize with the total population in its region in 1998. This is the first year that we have observations. We do this so that changes in the native population do not affect the instrument, right? I know that I'm working with IBs, so I would have to discuss about the relevance and exogeneity assumptions. Don't have time for that, just for you to know that this is a very well-known instrument, and we've performed different checks to see that it actually works, and the past location of immigrants predicts current location patterns.
I understand that you are instrumenting the amount of immigrants. Yeah? Okay. You try to instrument the amount of immigrants in each.
Yes, yeah.
So I really don't understand the instrument, because the instrument, I think, well, I have not thought about it, but it looks a good instrument for the composition of immigrants
what you're doing, I don't.
I mean, no, what I say is, what is the intuition?
The intuition is
because some years ago, I mean, the amount of immigrants is also related with the opportunities, the labor market opportunities.
But it has changed a lot. It has changed a lot, and something that we can see also from the data, it's that immigrants do settle in different parts due to different reasons. So, in instance, just to give you a couple of, for instance, here. This is how Latin Americans are distributed, okay? A few Spanish regions. So what we see is that they settle a lot here in, of course, Barcelona and Madrid always attract a lot, but they tend to settle much more in the north. The theory that says is that there are connections. A lot of people from these areas migrated to Latin America. And for instance, just if we look at people coming from Morocco, what we see is that it's much more in the south. So it's true that economic factors matter, but there are other things that are not economic factors. In this case, maybe closeness to the home country. So the main idea is that it's true that economic factors are a pull factor, but there are other things, connections, maybe a port, an airport, something that made it easier to arrive. So that's what's going on. Okay. Yes, so the intuition is that networks matter, and also location patterns so this is a census in 1991. So this means that it's immigrants who came to Spain in the 1980s. This is before the big economic boom. there were other factors also at play. Okay, the data. So our main data source is Muestra Continua de Vidas Laborales. This is an administrative database. So what we have here is information for 40% of all social security affiliates. The good part of this data is that for each individual that's recorded, we have the whole labor market history. Since the first day of employment, we can see and track everything. So with this, what we do is we build a yearly panel that goes from 1998 to 2008, where we have the outcomes of each individual in each year. We cannot restrict the sample to native people because we want to see the impact of immigrants over natives that are aged 25, 45%, and are under the general regime of the social security. Just for you to know, more or less 80-something% of Spanish workers are under this regime, so it's not a constraint, it's mainly because other schemes have particularities, so we want to be conservative in that sense, okay? The remaining data, as I was mentioning, for this third part of the IB, or past networks, past location, 1991 decennial census, and for the current information about immigrants, municipal registers, okay, which have quite rich data. So with this said, I'm moving into the results section. This is how the results could look like. Here I've excluded control variables, but for ease of understanding and interpretation, I'm going to be discussing results like this. So I've plotted what's the absolute effect that immigrants have for each individual, then what's the differential, gender-based differential effect, and what's the double difference. So first of all, what we see is that differences are not so big, so it seems to be a small endogeneity bias. However, from this moment on, I'm going to be focusing on the results with the IB, which we deem to be better. So what do we see? Well, if we look at the absolute effect, there seems to be a small negative effect for men, regardless of whether they have kids. And in the case of women, it's only for those who do not have children. Here, I'm here now. Why might be this? We know from previous work carried out for Spain by Catalina Modolante and Sara de la Rica that they explored the effect that immigrants have for native men and women, and what they discover is that native women and immigrants are more complementary. Or say in other words, the competition is going to be smaller because they're not perfect substitutes, so they are imperfect substitutes, okay? They deem different reasons for this, but something that I would like to highlight is, for instance, tenure. So what, for instance, they claim is that tenure, this is job-specific experience, on average is smaller for women than for men. So if immigrants come, and of course, at least in some occupations, they're going to increase competition, women have a smaller job-specific experience. So this means that human capital cost or reallocation costs are going to be somehow smaller, plus they have higher educational levels on average. So it seems that reallocation is easier among women than men, and that might be explaining why the effect is smaller for them, but also it may be that there is a home care substitution effect, so that immigration is actually benefiting them because they are outsourcing these caring responsibilities. And this is actually what we see with this double difference here. We identify that there is a household substitution coming back. So there is also evidence of this household substitution effect, okay? So this is highlighting basically that family and care and responsibilities do actually constrain because these women do respond to this increased availability and affordability. Nevertheless, we find more evidence, or at least signs of child penalties. This is, if we look at the effect that having a child has for men, it seems to be positively associated, whereas for women, we should take both coefficients into account, it's negative. So there seems to be still difference, the differential effect of children between gender. Okay, what happens if we go into intensive margins? This is the number of annual days work, weekly hours work. I'm gonna focus on these ones first. The storyline is exactly the same as before. So all the results that I have just and logic that I've been discussing remains. So this means that outsourcing housework especially benefited mothers who actually increased their labor supply relative to men. However, yes, micro.
I would like some clarification here,
Which
because
slide?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding it well. Let's see, for example.
Should I move into maybe the first one, which was?
No.
Okay.
This one.
Okay.
The effect, for example, if the
Okay.
proportion.
I haven't mentioned, but these variables are. Okay, I've performed a transformation, hyperbolic sign transformation, because in order to make it like logs, so that it can be understood as a 1 percentage point increase in the share of immigrants reduces annual working days by 3.5%. That's the interpretation. I haven't mentioned it because then it's complicated.
Okay, so in the case of women with children, you don't find a significant effect.
No.
But with respect to, for example, the last column,
Okay. The last
full time, part time.
Mm-hmm.
There you find a negative effect. So
That's where I'm going. So the logic here is okay. That's why I was talking about these two before, but I wasn't talking about this one. I'm moving to precisely this one. So the story changes when we take part time, full time. So this means is that migration, it's not increasing the probability of working full time for this woman. And this is where I'm coming actually. What we suggest is that there seems to be a trade-off. I mean, you can outsource and hire someone, but of course, as long as the benefits of working compensate the cost. And what we mention is that part-time employment seems to be part of this equilibrium. So let's say I can hire someone, but for some hours. And also we know that after childbirth, part-time employment is recurrent option for many women. So it's not surprising that the arrival of immigrants, it's increasing also full-time employment. So they are working more, some days more, some hours more, but this doesn't mean that their contract is full-time, okay? And what we deem is that it seems to be part of this equilibrium. I can hire someone, but probably not whole day, okay? I don't know if that makes sense for you or not, but that's what we suggest. We cannot empirically prove it, but we believe that there's something ongoing there. Again, we still, in these three variables, we can find this negative association of children for mothers, but yes.
I have here another doubt.
I have here another doubt, but this is just because of the econometric approach. Let's move back to the previous slide.
This one? No.
Yes, I think it works. There is an econometric question, maybe because I'm not an econometrician. So my question is, how it is possible to find that you have the differential effect? You have women minus men without children. So the difference is significant. However, now let's move to
you mean this one, for instance, this one?
Men with children, not without, with children. So it's significant.
Sorry, I lost. Where are you looking at?
The first column, for example,
yes.
Women, men with children.
With children here.
Yes, that is significant. However, women with children, that is above, the absolute effect is not significant.
You mean this one?
Yes, that is not significant. So
yeah,
how do you move from one to the other?
What you do, it's basically it's testing the parameters. So what I mean, it's
okay. It's a different parameter.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
So this could be alpha 4. Look, the red value was alpha 4, and the other one is you check the joint significance of different parameters. That's why it's different. That's how you construct it. So, okay, more child penalties, and now finally moving into earnings, what we find for earnings, same storyline. So I'm not gonna repeat myself, just two things here. What this substitution effect in annual earnings, it's telling us is that, okay, it seems that working more, it's translating into higher wages, makes sense. But what's interesting is that it also happens for part-time adjusted daily earnings. So since this variable is close to hourly wages, what it's telling us is that it's not only that because you work more hours, you're getting more money. It seems that it's also that the remuneration of your time, it's been higher. And what we suggest, again, we cannot empirically test it, it's that since women are staying probably longer in the labor market, or at least their attachment is increasing because they're being substituted, then labor market experience increases, or at least it's signaling that they want to remain in the labor market. And this might lead to a higher remuneration. That's what we believe might be going on. So, not going into this, in the chapter we perform an heterogeneous analysis, check a couple of issues, but definitely not time for that. So moving into the conclusions, we've detected a house childcare substitution effect. We've seen that this is working both for the labor supply, extensive, intensive, and for earnings. So overall, what we can take from these results is that, as we expected, home and family responsibilities do constrain labor supply, especially for women. So when there's someone when you can outsource it, it seems to be a response. We still see that children is negatively associated for women's labor performance, while this is not the case for men. So we can basically recommend stronger policies that reconciliate family and work, and as a suggestion, increasing public childcare services, enlarging paternity leaves. Spain has recently been following this line, although still it's not the same duration as for mothers. And this is more for the private sector, but in those cases in which it's possible, maybe making work arrangements a bit more flexible could be another option. So now I'm about to finish. So main ideas briefly. In chapter 1, we've seen from a comparative perspective that of the occupational segregation that male and female immigrants experience. And what we see is that this literature is enriched when we take this intersectional approach, this is gender and migration, and when we use local segregation indexes, we learn things that sometimes remain under the carpet if we don't pay attention to that. Then in chapter 2, we identify who are actually the winners and losers from this occupational segregation, and we see that again, immigrants are the main losers, but especially female immigrants. Also, we've seen that education seems to explain part of the geographical difference, and actually if we read policy suggestions, what we see is that, as I was mentioning, avoiding this educational outcrowding and overqualification of immigrants should be a policy priority. And finally, in chapter 3, we've basically highlighted how important family responsibilities and compatibility between work and family life is. And we've seen that in the case of immigrants, that they can somehow reduce some gender-based barriers in the labor market, okay? And just some questions that, of course, came to my mind while finishing, and that could be future lines of research. It's that, of course, I offer a comparative perspective, but it could be also interesting to perform some country case studies to see what's going on with the specific policies and specific integration programs. Also, I haven't mentioned, but we are not taking into account within occupation wage inequalities between natives and immigrants because we don't have the data. But if we could have that, then we could unveil more things, and we could also explore maybe wage gap between these two groups, and also by taking gender into account, which sometimes is forgotten. And in the last chapter, what we could follow or do is do immigrants affect other spheres rather than this labor market, not only in Spain, also in other countries. And since there's been this recent enlargement of the paternity leave in Spain, can we explore the effects that this policy has had, especially for the labor market attachment of mothers? There is a fly here, so I'm not crazy. That was all. Thank you all for the attendance, and it was a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very nice presentation, very deep work, and congratulations. But I open the microphone to questions or remarks or comments.
Yes.
Hola.
Thank you, Amaia. The presentation was very good. I have just a curiosity, something that is in your dissertation but is not here. Mm-hmm. Something about the third chapter, because I'm interested in that topic.
Okay.
Here you didn't mention anything about the effect of education, but in the dissertation you did. The effect of how, whether it is different for native women, the substitution effect.
You mean? No.
Yes, okay. Yes. Whether the effect of immigration on migrant women is different from those who are low educated as compared to those who are highly educated. And it seems to me, but I want to clarify this, that your result adds something new to the literature, because previous studies have found the effect just for the high educated women. However, you find the effect for low educated women. So this is something that I find particularly interesting because it departs from previous studies.
So, as you mentioned, most of the work that's been following this idea, what they usually focus is on high-skilled women. The claim is that it's to avoid problems of competition. But I was curious, and I did this heterogeneous analysis by educational levels. And what we actually find, high means those who went to university, whereas low it's those who didn't. What we see is that the effect is coming for those middle and low educated. So at first, I have to be honest, I was quite surprised, like what's happening on here? And what I claim is that the arrival of immigrants benefited middle and low skilled women because this service became much cheaper. I mean, high skilled women who had potentially also due to assortative matching more money could already hire natives. They already did. So the ones who benefited from this, it's actually those who could not afford it before. So it's like this structure generalized in the European labor market, in the Spanish labor market. And it's something that has been documented, not qualitatively, but quantitatively with interviews with women. I mean, more and more people it's hiring these services, and that's the key. The ones who were high skilled and probably had more money could do it already before migrants came here. It's the middle and low skilled who benefited. And something that's also reassuring is that in Italy, they found similar results. They focused on elderly take care and retirement age, and they find that it was they actually had data on wealth, and they saw that it's less educated and less wealthier who benefited also from this system in Italy. And given the similarity in a lot of aspects, it's reassuring. So yeah.
Amaia, do chat hai unha pregunta de Jorge Seijo. Faina en galego, si queres podela contestar como queiras.
De galego non hablo.
Ola, a miña cuestión era sobre a cuarta utilizada para traquear a distribución xeográfica dos inmigrantes.
La que, perdón, la?
IV?
El IB, sí.
Quero dicir que era comúnmente asumido que os inmigrantes tendían a ubicarse nas mesmas localidades que as anteriores xeracións de inmigrantes, pero non estou seguro se iso segue sendo válido a día de hoxe. Quería saber o teu punto de vista.
Ha cambiado, bueno, la distribución de inmigrantes en España, sobre todo países que más mandaban, ha cambiado. Es verdad que, sobre todo después de 2008, después de la crisis, ha habido cambios, pero yo sí que creo que sigue funcionando el instrumento. De hecho, creo que hay algún trabajo que en vez de utilizar solo hasta el periodo 2008, amplía el periodo de años, y en el caso español sigue utilizando el instrumento. Y vamos, entiendo que comprobaron que funciona esto de la relevancia, de que explica, con lo cual yo diría que sí que sigue funcionando, sí que hay importantes factores de red, ¿no? Y así que esa sería la respuesta.
Si no hay más preguntas, yo tengo...
Nada, un par de cuestiones. Me llamó la atención el resultado, bueno, yo hablo en castellano, ya.
Sí, sin problema, ya está, ya se pasó.
Sí. Bueno, lo primero es felicitarte.
Gracias.
La tesis está fenomenal, has hecho una presentación buenísima y yo creo que tienes una carrera académica por delante que va a merecer la pena. El resultado que encuentras del efecto sobre el salario diario, tú no tienes datos para explicar un poco si, por ejemplo, indicadores de si tienen más trabajos en los que haya supervisión o tengan más responsabilidad, algo que te permita indagar algo.
Hay una variable que es como el estatus de la ocupación, pero va de 0 a 10. Podría intentar mirar algo por ahí. Sí, esa es una variable.
Sí, es que era interesante ese resultado.
Bueno, es como las categorías de ocupaciones suelen ir de 1 a 10.
Sí.
1 es como las más prestigiosas.
Sí.
Sí, pero es que normalmente las categorías, los índices que se utilizan para categorizar las ocupaciones suelen tener... Los índices que se suelen utilizar para categorizar ocupaciones suelen tener que ver bien con salarios o bien con el nivel educativo de los individuos que trabajan ahí. Por eso preguntaba, y en esta en concreto...
En general, bueno,
no tiene que ver con el tipo de tareas que se desempeñan, que es lo que creo que quería decir un poco Begoña, ¿no? Si son de supervisión, si son más elementales, ¿no?
No, es que ya te digo, lo máximo es esa variable que va de 1 a 10, donde 1 es como sería, yo creo que la clasificación, pues directivos y gerentes de tal, y la última es algo relacionado así como... manual, no sé cómo, que tengo que mirarlo en detalle, pero esa sería la única, así que venga a mi mente ahora mismo de la base de datos, esa sería la más, porque sí es verdad que es como, son un poco hipótesis que lanzo yo, ¿no? Pero bueno, sí, podría.
En la parte de segregación, cuando muestras las diferencias entre países y tú al final dices una conclusión como que, bueno, aquí hay muchos factores culturales, ¿pero se puede investigar?
Sí, de hecho, bueno, en la primera versión que tuvimos del primer capítulo, hicimos un análisis luego de regresiones, es decir, una vez que tenemos el índice de segregación ya, por países ya homogenizado eso, ¿no? Utilizamos pues eso, variables sobre todo macro, de pues lo que os estaba mencionando antes, ¿no? Que hay scores para índices de integración. Lo que pasa es que cuando lo mandamos a revisión nos echaron un poco piedras diciendo que, pues eso, que había problemas de endogeneidad, de colinealidad, y decidimos quitarlo. Y un poco yo creo que por cubrirnos las espaldas lo hemos mantenido así. Pero de hecho yo creo que incluso salían algunas cosas interesantes. Pero, o sea, de hecho sí que, ya te digo, seguimos un poco esa línea, solo que no la hemos incluido por eso, un poco por decir sí, es verdad, al final eran correlaciones, no era más. Sí, a mí esa parte también me gustaba, todo lo que he dicho, a mí esa parte me gustó. A mí me gustó. Hombre, ¿y tú sabes el trabajo que es ahí buscar todas las macrovariables de cada país? Pero bueno, y ya te digo, yo creo que salían cosas interesantes, pero bueno, se quedó así, pero sí. Está escrito, está hecho, sí. Así que bueno.
Bueno, una última pregunta,
Sí.
o mejor dicho, dos comentarios. Un comentario es la influencia de la oferta en la inmigración. Por ejemplo, pienso que en España a un momento determinado vino un porcentaje importante de inmigración femenina al cuidado doméstico, que lo has señalado en todas partes. Y entonces, claro, hay eso, es decir, hay oferta de mujeres, específicamente mujeres, para cuidar a mayores o ayudar en la casa. Por la parte contraria, y se notaba en el capítulo 2 la diferencia, hay tendencia británica que tiene Portugal de buscar trabajadores con altos skills, por ejemplo, médicos.
Tienen de hecho un bilateral agreement muy fuerte ahí.
No sé cuántos españoles médicos trabajan en Portugal hoy, pero hace unos cuantos años era una parte significativa, porque les pagaban más que aquí.
De hecho, diría que en España ahora la tendencia es irse a Inglaterra y Portugal está recogiendo a gente de excolonias. Es lo que te he dicho antes, tienen ahora acuerdos bilaterales con estos países para captar.
Claro, Inglaterra tiene un porcentaje importante de su PIB en la City londinense, donde los trabajadores, me contaba un colega académico que es difícil encontrar un inglés.
Sí, así es.
Son inmigrantes, pero son inmigrantes.
Es otra historia.
Mi informador pagaba una casa en el centro de Londres que costaba 6.000 libras, y eso era una parte significante
del sueldo.
Y había sido un académico aquí, pocos años antes. Michel Roy. Bueno, ese es el comentario, la influencia del cambio. Y luego, una cosa que pusiste, pero no dijiste, es que entendí que el capítulo 3 tiene un premio.
¿Perdón? Sí, lo dije al principio, Bueno, sí.
Yo quería recordar.
Vale. La verdad que me hizo ilusión, eso sí que es verdad. Hizo ilusión. Pero sí.
Muchas gracias por la presentación. Repito lo que dijeron mis colegas. Excelente seminario. El trabajo se ve que es un trabajo profundo y de repercusión y tengo que seguir. Es una pena, por otro lado, que no estés más aquí, que te tengas que...
Cerrando etapas. Y muchas gracias, de verdad, sobre todo Coral y Olga, que han ayudado mucho. Así que sí.
La felicitación se sigue a las invitadas. Coral y tampoco.
Exacto.
Yo tengo que decir que ese tercer capítulo de la tesis es su responsabilidad. Yo ayudé marginalmente, o sea que el trabajo doctoral fue dependiente de nosotros al 100% al principio y marginalmente al final, o sea que como se espera, exactamente, ese es el éxito, exactamente, ese es el éxito.
Así que nada, muchas gracias, de verdad.